Dear Blizzard, hi again, it's me, Austin. How you doing? Sorry about last time, about Lucio. I've gotten over Lucio. In fact, I'm so terrified by the power of his sound gun that these days I feel like it's just too irresponsible to play him anymore. I've moved on to greener, less terrifying pastures. I've gone from a Brazilian black man in a tank top and rollerblades with a city-leveling sound gun to a short Chinese girl with glasses, a poofy coat, and Eve from WALL-E glued to her back. She's decked out from head to toe in a Canada Goose coat because she's the designated Dr. Freeze of the Overwatch team, using a gun filled with an unknown cryogenic fluid to slow, freeze, and ultimately kill the opposition. Actually, that's actually kind of fucking terrifying, come to think of it. Like, once when I was a little kid, I went sledding with some bad gloves and I got first-degree frostbite. I didn't get permanent nerve damage, but when I got back inside, my bones felt like they were in a vice getting crushed by some invisible force, and my skin felt like it was on fire and ready to fall off. I can't even fucking imagine a cute girl with glasses running around doing that shit to people on purpose. Blah. Well, great. So, May's fucking ruined for me now. Oh well. Since she's ruined for me, I might as well ruin her for everybody else by nitpicking the hell out of her with a careful application of thermodynamics and internet pedantry. Freezing your enemies has a long, rich history in both video games and our culture. Dr. Freeze and Batman, Mega Man, Sub-Zero, Metroid, Super Smash Bros., World of Warcraft, and I could go on and on and on for the next 10 minutes and never run out of examples. This mechanic is fucking everywhere, and it makes sense. Slowing down and stopping people is a pretty great mechanic that can instantly add depth to the choices a player makes while playing a game. And since we all know that frozen things don't move a whole lot, this one was a no-brainer since its inception. I'm not gonna insult your intelligence by pretending for the sake of drama that frozen people magically thawing unharmed isn't completely and totally ludicrous. It's simply not possible. Cutting-edge researchers have had success freezing individual organs and tissue samples, but freezing an entire human body is an immensely complicated endeavor. Our bodies do not come built in with tolerance for core temperatures shifting much at all, with basic cognitive and physical functions getting fucked if our body temperature drops just a few degrees. Controlled, slow, cryogenic preservation of a human is theoretically possible, something we may look into in more detail eventually, but for now, all you need to know is that all of our organs have different hydration and electrolyte balances and don't all equally respond to cold in the same way. So in order to properly freeze a human body and minimize damage, it has to be done very, very slowly, and each organ has to be individually prepared with proper refrigerant conditioners. Not only that, but in these games, people freeze solid and then magically burst into full operation within seconds, their bodies summoning some sort of Super Saiyan inner power to heat themselves up enough to resume normal function. Where is all this magical heat coming from? Bullshit land, that's where. But fine, whatever. Freezing and thawing a person without causing them harm is fucking absurd. We get it. Who fucking cares? Suspension of disbelief is a cornerstone of having a good time, so let's just accept it. That's not the fun part anyway. The fun part, the fun part is this. Is May's freezing gun possible? Could you build a gun that rains down death upon your enemies, holding them in place like crystalline wax statues made of freeze-dried beef? Let's figure this the fuck out right now. First, we need to review a few basic concepts before we can get to May's horrific instrument of frozen terror, specifically heat and temperature. We tend to think of heat and temperature as being interchangeable, and that makes a lot of sense. For the most part, in our everyday lives, the distinction isn't that important, but when looking at a gun that can freeze people in seconds and the properties involved, the distinction becomes crucial. Heat is energy, but temperature isn't. Heat is dependent upon mass. For instance, if you take 2 pots of boiling water, one that's filled with 2 liters and another that's filled with just 1, they will both be the same temperature, but the 2-liter pot will have twice as much heat energy in it. Different substances and elements all require different amounts of heat to change temperature, which is measured in something called the specific heat capacity. A good example of this process at work is one of my favorite things on the entire planet: pizza. Pizza, at its most basic, is made up of 3 things: crust, sauce, and cheese. Each of these 3 components has a different specific heat capacity. So if you take a pizza out of the oven, each individual element will be the same temperature as the surrounding elements, but they'll have different heats. That's why cheese and sauce can peel the flesh off the roof of your mouth in seconds, but the crust is just fine. The crust has a much lower specific heat capacity, which means that it takes less energy for it to reach higher temperatures, and therefore it imparts less energy into you when it meets your mouth, which actually brings us to our next important concept: transference of heat energy and equilibrium. Heat, as I mentioned, is energy. Specifically, it's microscopic kinetic energy stored in molecules. Heat transfer is a pretty integral part of our existence. Heat energy conferred from radiation from the sun is responsible for the sustenance of life on our planet and is effectively the origin of almost all heat energy used on our planet. Incidentally, heat loves to move around. Where does it go? From things that have more heat into things that have less, until they're at equilibrium. For example, if you take an ice cube from your freezer and place it on the counter, heat from the surrounding air and the countertop underneath will transfer into the ice cube, warming it, and eventually it will melt into water and will continue to heat until the water is the same temperature as the surrounding air. And if you move the ice cube before it melts and touch the countertop, you can actually feel this effect happening with your own hands. The countertop will be cold, a consequence of its heat energy leaving into the ice cube. The absence of heat energy in relation to something else is what cold is. So when you bite into a piping hot piece of pizza and the cheese burns your mouth, it's because heat energy in the cheese is leaving into your relatively colder mouth, and it's moving at such a rate that it causes trauma to your cells on a microscopic level, killing them. Our freezers keep food cold not by imparting some magical concept of coldness upon them, but rather by removing heat from our food, by removing heat from the air, which is vented into your home. The food radiates its heat into the surrounding air, seeking equilibrium, until eventually the air and the food are the same temperature, cold as fuck. Which at last brings us back to our adorable little bespectacled terrorist. Armed with this knowledge, we can finally figure out how the hell May's freezing gun actually fucking works. The human body maintains a relatively consistent temperature averaging at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit and 37 degrees Celsius. In order to be frozen solid, this heat all has to be removed to below the freezing point of water, 31 degrees Fahrenheit, or -1 degree Celsius. Ordinarily, just being out in cold air isn't enough to do this because our body and the bodies of other mammals are what's called endothermic, which means we're able to maintain our body temperatures through the use of our metabolisms. This is in contrast to ectothermic animals like lizards and insects that rely almost entirely on the ambient temperature of the surrounding atmosphere. However, there are limitations to our own endothermic properties. When exposed to cold for a long period of time or encountering cold that's particularly severe, our body temperature sheds away more quickly than we can replenish it, which is when hypothermia sets in. Water has an incredibly high specific heat capacity, for instance, which is why it's able to suck our heat away so quickly and why you feel absolutely atrocious when you jump into a pool that's too cold, even though you'd have absolutely no problems at all if the air were the same temperature. Well, so how do we figure out how to remove all of this heat? Well, some people, somewhat lazily, use the water content of the body to determine how to freeze a person. How lazy! Sure, our bodies are predominantly water, anywhere from 50 to 70% by most estimations, but this is a terrible method for a few reasons. One, that water is spread out everywhere almost evenly. We're not just meat buckets with legs filled with water. For another, water, in order to freeze, must drop below the freezing temperature, which it cannot do if it is surrounded by other solid mass with heat in it. If you blast someone with enough cold air to remove only enough heat to freeze their water content, they'd die from hypothermia, sure, but they'd never freeze solid. That bone, muscle, and fat would diffuse their heat into the surrounding water and keep it tragically liquid. To that end, we need to figure out exactly how much heat energy a human body has. Impossible, you say? Ha! Nonsense! All we need is to figure out what a person is made out of, and luckily for me, I already did this weeks ago with my plasma rifle video. Anyway, in order to figure out how much heat energy a given person stores, I separated the body into 4 contingent parts: the skeleton, water content, non-fat muscle and organs, and fat content. I then found the specific heat capacity numbers for each, using calcium hydroxyapatite for bone, lean, dried pork for non-fat organs, water for, water, and dry rendered lard for fat. Specific heat capacity is the number of joules it takes to heat 1 gram of something by 1 degree Celsius or Kelvin. Or, for our purposes, the amount of joules you have to remove in order to cool something by 1 degree Kelvin. In this case, we get values of 0.662 for bone, 4.186 for water, 2.72 for muscles and organs, and 2.26 for fat. Now all we need is a model human. We should use... oh, of course! Roadhog! Roadhog is the largest, normal-looking human you can freeze solid in Overwatch. Perfect! How big is he? I mean, he's clearly a large man, but what the hell do I compare it to? I mean, he's not exactly lazy nor a couch potato. That weight has a purpose. That weight has meaning. The fat is fucking athletic fat, hiding a layer of muscle capable of ripping people from across the room over to him in an instant. Not unlike a Japanese sumo wrestler, actually. Yulam Bayarin Bayambajav is a Mongolian-born heavyweight sumo wrestler who stands at 6 foot 1 inch and weighs a hefty 360 pounds. Sumo wrestlers, in spite of their appearance, are actually incredibly athletic and are probably in better shape than any of us. In all that weight, only about 15% of his body is body fat. The rest is water and muscle. So, we just plug our numbers into our machine, crank the lever, sacrifice a goat, and we get exactly how many joules of heat has to be removed to freeze Roadhog, bringing all 360 pounds of sinew and grease down from 310.15 Kelvin, the temperature of the human body, down to 272.15 Kelvin, a drop of exactly 38 degrees Celsius and 1 solid degree below the freezing point of water. 52.96 megajoules, the amount of energy stored in a car driving on the damn highway. So, how do we get rid of this energy? As if answering our prayers for awesome, there is a method of cooling that doesn't use cryogenic fluid. It uses fucking lasers. That's right, you can freeze shit using fucking lasers. This works by a laser of a very specific wavelength hitting an object. This object releases a photon that actually carries more energy away in the form of light than it absorbs. Fucking cool, right? Too bad this would be terrible. Terrible for our purposes. Turning Roadhog into a 29 megawatt photon bomb is a good fucking way to melt your own face off. So no, for our purposes, we're gonna have to stick with cryogenics since it's way less terrifying and May is clearly using some sort of spray, not a laser. Remember, heat moves from a warmer substance to a colder one until both substances are the same temperature. So we just need to find something that has a high specific heat capacity that's cold enough, and by the time it warms up to 272.15 Kelvin, our boy will be a giant 360-pound frozen statue. And what substance would this be? The same thing it almost always is in our channel, hydrogen. Hydrogen has an incredibly high heat capacity by mass, higher than anything else known to humans, in fact. It's light, and when hot, it can release an assload of energy, and when cold, it can suck an assload away. Most people know that if you dip something in liquid nitrogen, it will freeze almost instantly to the point of shattering. Liquid nitrogen is an incredibly cold 63 Kelvin, but it's not cold enough to freeze a human all the way. But if you take hydrogen and cool it down until it's a liquid, and then cool it down even more, it turns solid. At a frigid 4 Kelvin, it is barely warmer than the coldest theoretical temperature ever, where all motion stops entirely. Absolute zero, or 0 Kelvin. As a substance approaches absolute zero, its specific heat capacity drops, so you get diminishing returns on energy reduction. Still, taking this into account, in theory, if you had enough solid hydrogen, you could freeze anything. Even a giant behemoth of a man whose sex appeal has no limitations. So, how much solid hydrogen would it take to freeze all 360 pounds of man flesh? 13.9 kilograms, or over 30 fucking pounds. pounds. Holy shit! What the actual fuck? What the fuck? Do you know how absurd this is? May's freeze gun can freeze a target in just shy of 2 seconds. 1 in 57/60ths of a second, point of fact, which means the gun is pumping out 7.8 kilograms of solid hydrogen a second, or over 17 pounds a second, which would be hitting the target with a whopping 1,500 joules per second. Jesus fucking Christ, this is enough force to send most people flying backward, let alone the negative impacts of getting blasted with cryogenic materials. This is essentially the same flow rate of anti-riot water cannons, which, by the way, aren't handheld guns, but rather entire fucking trucks. That's because at this rate, each fully loaded gun has 171 pounds of hydrogen per reload. And in my average game before dying, my May fires a total of over 400 kilograms, or almost 1,000 fucking pounds. There's no way that little person is running around with a backpack weighing half a ton on her back, let alone one arming a gun that's unloading 123 gallons a minute of solid hydrogen aerosol. No fucking way. And that's not to mention the Leidenfrost effect, which is an insulating pocket of air created when a cold object touches a hot object. That would make it incredibly difficult to effectively make contact. Although at the speeds that hydrogen would be moving at, I'm not sure that's entirely relevant. It'd likely freeze Roadhog's skin instantly, shatter it, and crystallize his internal organs while he screamed his last before his fucking vocal cords froze shut forever and he revives as a white fucking walker. So, I'm sorry to say it, aspiring evil Frozen-themed geniuses out there, in order to build a weapon even half as badass as May's, you're gonna have to commandeer a riot truck and retrofit it with a cryogenic freezer. Who knows? For all we know, she's like Wonder Woman, but instead of an invisible plane, she has an invisible fire truck that follows her around everywhere, filled to the brim with solid hydrogen, ready to equip this adorable, innocent-looking person with the capability of utterly ruining the life of anybody who dares stand in her way by sandblasting their faces off with cryogenic fucking materials. Blah. Sincerely, Austin. P.S. Oh, by the way, my Mirror's Edge game was glitched last week, so I ended up playing a genocide run of Undertale and starting a new Fallout 4 survival character. Come watch me play video games today at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, or GMT -6. I will actually be finishing my Mirror's Edge game and may play some Fallout Undertale and maybe Overwatch. Anyway, hop on over to twitch.tv/shoutycast and watch me die a lot. Oh, and before you go, click the link in the description to vote on what game you'd like to see me play next week, and I will play that game. Thank you everyone for watching my video about May! I had so much fun doing this one. Cryogenics is terrifying. Yeah. It's one small note that I didn't get to in the actual video itself. The gun probably still wouldn't be able to freeze you solid in a minute, seconds. It would kill you probably at that rate. You would probably die from May's gun, but you probably wouldn't freeze solid because of its uneven dispersal of heat. Now, if you drop someone in a big bucket full of solid hydrogen at 4 degree Kelvin that had enough mass, had 22 pounds of it, yeah, or 30 pounds of it, then yeah, they would freeze solid eventually. I don't know how long it would take. Probably not that long. You'd have to cover your ears though, they'd be screaming, they'd be in a lot of pain. If you like this video, please like it and share it with people. I love making these videos, and when you share them, it makes me feel so good, and I love it so much. And I'd like to throw out a personal thank you to our Patreon supporters who make this show possible and make other shows that we do possible. You are awesome, and if you want to be a Patreon supporter, and you like this show, and you want to support it with money, you can actually go to our Patreon page, which is linked here on the bottom left of the video, and there's a link in the description. And anything from $1 a day helps us, but if you do $3 a day, you get early access to videos, which is awesome! Anyway, my voice is hoarse. I got too yelly this week, so I'm gonna go. Yup. I actually haven't stopped playing Lucio. I love Lucio. He's my favorite.